Hello. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking a bit about Latin American politics, but especially Brazilian politics. Now, a few disclaimers that I want to make before proceeding. This is obviously an English language video, so apologies for my lack of Spanish or Portuguese. I also apologize in advance if I'm mispronouncing any names. That's not deliberate, but that's unintentional, basically. Um, I also want to make it clear that this is a very basic level video. It's not intended to be very comprehensive. I admit that my knowledge in Latin American politics is not outstanding, but I am interested in geopolitics, so just want to talk a little bit about this subject. Um, so it's been a very, very turbulent year for Brazil, with the impeachment proceedings against President Rousseff. She has, I would argue, had quite an influence on the world stage insofar as she has been president of Brazil at a time when the country has hosted, I was going to say two major events, but at least one, which was, of course, the Football World Cup um, in 2014, I believe. Yeah, and she would have been president during the Olympics later this year in Rio de Janeiro, but of course, she is now in this transition period whilst the proceedings go ahead. Now, I want to be as neutral as possible in this video because I don't know enough about the details to take one side or another, and I really would appreciate Brazilian feedback. So, any Brazilian YouTubers who are watching this, I would like to hear your views. Um, Dilma Rousseff has been described as the second most powerful woman in the world after Angela Merkel, and she is one of relatively few left wing presidents in Brazilian history. She, of course, she was elected on top of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who at his peak was a very, very popular president at his peak. In fact, he had been described as the most popular leader in the Western Hemisphere. Um, This was amidst the so-called pink tide across Latin America, when there was a period from approximately the late 1990s to the late 2000s, when there was a large number of left-leaning leaders elected. Some examples include Rafael Carrera in Ecuador, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, who was succeeded by Manuel Maduro. Um, Manuel Maduro? Can't remember his first name, but Maduro anyway. Michelle Bachelet in Chile, um, Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, Manuel Zelaya in Honduras, and the Kirchners in Argentina, Nestor Kirchner and his wife Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. But Evo Morales in Bolivia is another prominent example, and Ollanta Humala in Peru. But it looks like this tide is starting to now turn around. If we look at the election of the centrist Mauricio Macri in Argentina, that could herald a starting point of a changing tide, perhaps more towards centrism, towards right wing politics. Now, my observation of geopolitics, when I reflect on South America, specifically the continent of South America, and I'm not including Central America with this, um, I would say there is some cause for success. This is my reflection as an outsider. What I base that on is if we look at the past of South America, there were both left wing and right wing dictatorships during the Cold War, guilty of some horrendous human rights abuses. Actually, I should extend this to Central America because one of the examples I'm going to give is Central America. Um, Largely today, South America has moved towards democracy. I appreciate that's a very abstract term and it gets thrown around a lot, but I think if you compare the situation in South America to other parts of the world that went through serious dictatorship, South America has progressed forward, and that's something that has to be welcomed. That's not to say the situation is anywhere near perfect, of course it's not. But if you look at South America in the 70s and 80s, when you had death squads operating, taking out political opponents, when there was widespread torture and human rights abuses. I would say the situation has moved on since then. And this is my basic reflection. I'm not saying this as an absolute fact, it's just a reflection. Um, Also, some very long running and bloody civil wars have either come to an end or they have greatly decreased in intensity. If we look at the Shining Path insurgency in Peru, that's largely, it's not over, but it's largely decreased. It looks like Colombia is genuinely on a path to possible peace. That has to be welcomed. It's a good thing. Um, Argentina has went through a transition to democracy, and there's all sorts of reconciliation programs in place. Looking at the dirty war and so on. Now in Brazil, obviously there's been a lot of focus on Brazil this year. Um, I was going to say this is like Brazil's Watergate, but I'm not sure if it's quite the right analogy. This was the British newspaper, The Economist, January this year. As you can see, they've got quite a cynical headline: Brazil's fall, Dilma Rousseff, and the disastrous year ahead. This is before she went through the impeachment proceedings. Now, as an outsider, I've no strong views on Dilma Rousseff either way because I don't know enough about her presidency to comment in detail. But she is arguably the most prominent example of the leaders from this pink tide. And they do vary, I should say. My reflection is that there's both hard left and centre left. Now, I wouldn't describe Dilma Rousseff as hard left. I would call her centre left, certainly compared to Hugo Chavez. Um, I think that it's very important when these situations happen to take into account the majority will of the people in any country. And my perception is that an overwhelming majority of Brazilians are in favour of these proceedings. There was widespread celebrations on the streets of Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Belo Horizonte, and other major cities when the proceedings were going ahead. I actually watched the breaking news from the Brazilian Parliament. Can't remember if it was CNN or the BBC covering that, but it looked like there was widespread celebrations on the street. Now, from her point of view, the Rousseff side and her supporters are saying this is a coup d'etat. Whether it is or not is a matter of debate. I do think there has been a tendency for left wing leaders to use this as a kind of um, allegation anytime that they fall out of power that it must be a coup d'etat. That doesn't mean, though, that there aren't issues with this. I mean, I can understand the anger from some Rousseff supporters at the hypocrisy that's going on, because a lot of those who are charging her with impeachment are themselves under investigation for corruption. And whatever way you look at it, that's hypocritical, including this interim president, Michael Temer. I appreciate he's only an interim president, but it would seem to me to be political opportunism. And I cannot help but feel she is being made somewhat a scapegoat for all of Brazil's problems. Now, Brazil is a democracy, an imperfect one, but it is essentially a democracy ever since the return to civilian rule. So, by extension of that, is it fair to put all blame on the head of state? Clearly, she has responsibility, and I have no doubt that there has been darker aspects of her administration, but I get the impression that her opponents are making her out to be the worst thing that has ever happened to Brazil, and I wonder, is that a fair assessment? Now, if you are anti-Rousseff, I'd be interested in hearing your point of view. I'm not, as an outsider, dictating my point of view. I'm just sharing my reflections. So if you're anti-Rousseff, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective. Um, okay, maybe she is guilty of corruption, but shouldn't there therefore be consistency? Because if Brazil is to be a functioning democracy, then the same standard should be held for everyone, surely. Um, and to those who are pro-Rousseff, my question would be, are you saying that her administration is completely innocent? I mean, I have heard people say that what she is being accused of is a relatively trivial matter. I don't know enough about that. So again, that's why this is sort of an open video. I'm asking opinions rather than voicing my own views. Um, what I do know is that it's extremely important that a country as important as Brazil has stability, and I do consider Brazil a very important country. It's the world's sixth or seventh biggest economy. It is, I think it's fair to say, the leading nation of South America. Um, so it's very important Brazil has some level of stability. I hope this doesn't result in violence on the streets because I'm slightly concerned about that because there seems to be very, very strong emotions on both sides. And I would urge Brazilians to, just think about your country, think about the future of your country. And I think it is important that there is due process, that there is rule of law, um, that Dilma Rousseff, if she is guilty of corruption, that she gets a fair trial. That should mean independent. Um, as far as I can see, this is independent judiciary who are involved as well, apart from the opposition MPs. So I think you could say that's okay, that's important. But there's a lot of factors with this. Now, in regards to the Olympics, it's essential that Brazil indicates a level of stability to the world because the Olympics is a very major international event, obviously. It's the world's biggest sporting event. There's also international concern, obviously, about the Zika virus. So Brazil really is under enormous pressure. Um, and it will be a major test of interim President Temer to see if this can go past smoothly. I think it would be very embarrassing for Brazil if there was major protests in the middle of the Olympics. Of course, this is not for me to say whether people should protest or not. Protest is a democratic right. One thing I would say though about the left, when they say that it's a coup d'etat, their own track record within the pink tide isn't exactly glowing with democracy. If you look at the example of Venezuela, and I appreciate this is a different country, but both Chavez and Maduro are hardly Democrats. They have shackled free press. They have presided over a very violent period in Venezuelan history. Violent crime has skyrocketed under Chavez's rule, and there is a deep intolerance of dissent. I wouldn't go so far as to say Maduro is a dictator, but he's definitely an autocrat, and that should lead to serious questions. It is interesting that a lot of the pink tide leaders, there's been something of a backlash, and their opinion ratings are extremely low. Um, Dilma Rousseff, as I understand it, has one of the lowest approval ratings of any Brazilian president in history. Um, so she's under enormous pressure. I'm not saying whether it's deserved or not deserved. I don't know enough about the situation. My understanding is she is being accused of complicity in the Petrobras scandal. Anyway, I'm going to round this up because I don't want to talk at great length about a subject I'm not massively informed on. But I am interested in these developments. It will be interesting to see what happens. All I would say is if she is guilty, yes, should be held accountable. But in my opinion, it has to be independent. It cannot be pursued by the opposition. Otherwise, that threatens democracy. This has to be independent. And there should also be consistency that anyone involved in corruption is held accountable, regardless of which political party they are from. Brazilians deserve better than that. I actually had, not me personally, but my family had a Brazilian guest earlier this year, and she didn't tell me her political favor, whether she was a Rousseff supporter or not. But my impression was that she wasn't, which isn't surprising. Most Brazilians aren't. But my impression was that she um, felt some degree of frustration at the situation in her country, and I imagine a lot of Brazilians do. So in some ways, I can understand why people were celebrating because I suppose this gives the impression of bringing an end to this crisis, if that's the right word. So, final point, if you're Brazilian, please let me know your thoughts. In fact, if you're from anywhere in South America, final point, I'm very interested in hearing different points of view. And if I've got anything wrong, I'll be very happy to amend that. on listen to people's opinions. But anyone attacking me over anything that's not related to this video or any unwarranted personal attacks, I'm going to delete the comment because I don't need to put up with that. Anything to do with my nationality or anything like that. I believe I've been civil in this video. I believe I've been reasonable. I believe I've been neutral. Um, so all I'm asking for is to hear people's opinions. Um, and I would request that you keep it in English if possible, simply because I don't understand Portuguese, and it's my channel. So if you can write in English, I would appreciate that. Um, Finally, the reason I am onto this subject is I've been watching this film, James Bond film Moonraker. Large part of it set in Rio de Janeiro, so that's that. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I really, really hope that Brazil maintains stability because Brazil has been successful in many ways. It's a good example of a very tolerant country. That's one of Brazil's great successes, in my opinion. Um, from what I can tell, Brazil's never had major religious tensions or ethnic tension. I shouldn't say never, but in recent years. It's hosted two major international events, the Football World Cup and soon to be the Olympics. I hope the Olympics are a resounding success. My best wishes to all athletes involved. I'm looking forward to the opening ceremony. Of course, Rio de Janeiro took over from London in 2012. We actually had special coins minted for the occasion, but I'm sure I'll make a video closer to the time specifically about the Olympics. So I hope everything goes well, and I really, really hope that Brazil can have a positive future no matter what happens. Thank you for watching. Please let me know your thoughts.